Good morning and welcome to Soul Endeavors. This is our second of a six-part series talking about the values embedded into our American flag, part of my calling to attempt to unite people in this country and reclaim the soul of America. Soul Endeavors exists as a mechanism for my own soul expression for the purpose of assisting others in connecting with their own soul and achieving their own soul purpose and perhaps most importantly, contributing towards that reclaiming of the soul of the nation. Last week, we focused on the color red and the values of bravery and valor. And you may recall that the first formal articulation of the values embedded into our flag were formalized in a report to the Continental Congress in 1782. And at that time, the color white was identified as reflecting the values of purity and innocence. We begin our discussion this morning with the definitions of purity and innocence. Purity is defined as freedom from adulteration, freedom from contamination. It is the condition or the quality of being pure. Synonyms for purity include innocence, goodness, virtue, righteousness, and decency. Innocence is defined as the lack of guile, the lack of corruption. It can also mean to be naive in terms of worldly affairs, sin, or crime. Synonyms for innocence include guiltless, virtuous, righteous, decent, and moral. In 2024, Jody Lawrence wrote an article taking her own dive into the meanings and the symbolisms in our American flag. She interpreted the concepts of innocence and purity to reflect honesty, fairness, and integrity in government, as well as peace and harmony among the citizens, all of whom would choose dialogue over violence. While our society has changed a lot over the past 250 years, the expectation was that the values built into our flag and that existed at the founding of our nation were intended not only to reflect the values of the country, but also to create a guide for future generations intended to ensure that the United States of America continued to be a country where the founding values would both guide and reflect the nation. In doing a little bit of research for this piece, I've learned so many things, and I didn't really appreciate how far our country has moved or how divisive the terms innocence and purity have become over time. It's been very interesting for me to understand and contemplate that part of the division in our country right now actually stems from a desire for purity and a desire for innocence. And some people are so desirous of that purity and that innocence that they now expect the government to protect them from all things impure. Very interesting concept. We're going to talk a little bit about it a little bit later this morning. But on the other side of that, or connected to that in some way, it's a perspective that in this pursuit of purity, in this pursuit of innocence, that the reliance on government has created basically a permanent class of victims. This victim mentality certainly is a victim mentality that I've been aware of, but I never really connected that to um, innocence or valor. Well, the other controversy pertains to whether the country itself is innocent or whether, in fact, it has been stained since the outset. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those things. I think it's important, and we did with the other values, to really look at the world religions and understand how the concepts of innocence and purity are handled or viewed in the different world religions. Because from my perspective, religion, organized religion in particular, has contributed to a divide in this country, and that's part of what I'm looking to address, is this premise that we have good people and bad people. People of one religion are going to be saved and everybody else is going to be doomed to hell. None of this is real. There are so many commonalities in all of our world religions, and what I'm learning is that the values of our American flag, as far as purity and innocence, cross religious boundaries. So we could talk a little bit more about that. Innocence is a prominent theme in the Bible, prominent in the Christian and the Jewish faiths. And within the Bible, almost half, or perhaps 50% of the references to innocence speak about the blood of the innocent, the loss of innocence, the intrusion into innocence. But within the overall scope of the Bible, the meaning of innocence really is the absence of guilt, and specifically the absence of guilt that would come from being disloyal to God. Within the Christian faith, innocence is focusing on moral integrity, spiritual cleanliness, and a heart that is in alignment with God and God's will. Within the Jewish faith, purity has a central theme. Many, many traditions are grounded on physical as well as spiritual purity. Within Islam, purity and innocence are fundamental values embedded into many rituals. And within the Islamic traditions, we speak about physical cleanliness, referring to cleanliness and purity within the body, within the clothing that is worn, and also in relation to and physical space and the environment need to be pure in order to achieve the purity that is necessary to reach uh, Allah in a pure way. Within the Hindu traditions and Hinduism, the qualities of innocence and purity are viewed as essential for gaining the knowledge and experiencing spiritual growth. Heaven is a pure realm within the Hindu tradition, and only the pure will be able to enter. Within Hinduism, also, it's understood that all wealth is to be gained through pure hands. Truthfulness, knowledge, light, wisdom, discernment, and cleanliness are all aspects of purity within the Hindu tradition. People who follow Buddhism, engage in the Buddhist tradition, view purification, purity, as pertaining to the personality as well as action. Purity and overcoming the impure aspects of perhaps human nature, perhaps personality, is the path to eliminating or overcoming those things about the self that are viewed as impure. And those things include anger, ignorance, and lust. In order to achieve purity, The people engaged in Buddhism practice meditation and moral cultivation. Atheists make up a large portion of American citizens. There are other religions, pantheism, and other things, but we're going to focus on the atheists and say that atheists very often value purity and innocence, whether they focus on their own body, have respect for the human body, they value integrity, personal integrity, and they believe that virtue can be achieved through personal choice and moral decision making. So atheists should be able to unite with us on the values of innocence and purity, chastity, sinlessness, virtue, integrity, honor, decency, wholesomeness, innocence, sinlessness. Of course, we would all like to unite behind these themes, but the nature of humans is to complain. I think the nature of humans is to complain, and we don't like to say that our fellow citizens are innocent. In fact, we think our fellow citizens are the furthest thing from innocent. There's an organization called 1776 Unites, and they were founded in 2020. The mission of 1776 Unites is to offer an aspirational narrative and to provide information and context to explain the promise of America. They intend to create and mobilize ordinary Americans to speak up and stand up for America. And they were founded by Robert Woodson. They publish essays, and one of the essays that I found was written by Joshua Mitchell in February 2020. And he entitled his essay, "We Live in an Impure World." Joshua Mitchell said this: "The longing for purity in America has become so acute that some Americans believe they should no longer be subject to the unappealing ideas that the First Amendment protects." That's a very interesting concept, and I'm inclined to agree with Joshua Mitchell. And it helps me understand why we have people in America who seem to feel entitled to be protected from impurity or protected from what they perceive as hate or just views that are divergent from their own. Joshua Mitchell in his article really speaks to the need in this country to gain control over our government, right? The government was intended to serve a limited purpose. The citizens were intended to control the government. But when we rely on the government to protect us from things that we don't like or from things that we find to be impure, we turn to the government for help with those things. We actually allow the government to become oppressive. And within the view of Joshua Mitchell, this need to protect, this desire for purity, has actually contributed to this victim mentality that exists here in this country where people feel victimized by their fellow citizens and they become a permanent class of victims because the government then is not motivated to help people help themselves. The government becomes the protector, and the people are not taking any accountability for the need to navigate in society where we do live in an impure world, and that is the reality. And would we really want it any other way? I don't know if we would want it another way. Uh, the other interesting thing that I found in the research that I was doing is this premise that rather than view the country as primarily innocent, there are many, many people who view the country just overall as violated and violating from the outset. And that really focuses on language. It focuses on American history, the history of slavery, some of the other things that we've engaged in as a country that are bad. And so we can look at, the expansion into the American West as a conquest over people rather than something to take pride in as a nation. Even the discovery of America can be turned into a story of violence and ill. The question is, does that contribute to the long-term sustainability of our country? If the people living in our country believe that we were bad from the outset, it's hard to see why anybody would want to unite behind it to save the country. If the country's bad, we've been bad since the outset. We take over people, we hurt people, we do bad things in the world. The reality is we live in a nation, and nations have always had conflict with each other. The nation of America holds itself out as a beacon of hope to the rest of the world. Have we lost that? Did we deserve that role? I don't. It's very evident that in America we still value innocence and purity. The color white has meaning throughout our society. We use white flowers to reflect, love and innocence and purity. We release white doves at events of significance and we admire their beauty. Um, so whether the country itself is innocent, is not innocent, um, whether we are pure, whether we are impure, I think we would all desire to be pure. We would all desire innocence. We like to protect the innocence of others and bring a pure heart. I think most people desire to bring a pure heart to bear on their day-to-day life. So we will be coming back to these concepts of innocence and purity. I think I've learned just how important these concepts are to understanding the division that is plaguing our country right now. So we definitely will be coming back to talk about these topics again. But for today, going to wrap it up. We'll be back next week, beginning to talk about the values associated with the color blue in the American flag. I appreciate your viewing. I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye bye.